This show has me doing something I'm not sure I ever thought I was going to do. We're going to argue a third round rookie quarterback versus a fifth round rookie quarterback. Both of those guys probably going to be irrelevant for fantasy, or are they? We'll see about that part. All I know is right now, I hate how they're ranked on draftsharks.com. So we're going to fight it out right here and let you decide. A brief Draft Sharks podcast starts right now. But we're going to start this one with a topic that honestly might ultimately prove irrelevant to many of your dynasty leagues on here, but it's the single ranking on draftsharks.com that I hate the most at the moment. And I think that there is some applicability to other situations, either currently or going forward. So we all watched the draft over the weekend. Shedeur Sanders is the one name that people would not shut up about. When's he going to go? Why is he falling? Blah, blah, blah. He finally landed with the Browns after they had taken another quarterback, and that's going to be the point of contention here. So if you look at draftsharks.com right now at the rookie quarterback rankings, you're going to find Shedeur Sanders ahead of Dillon Gabriel. Jared, why don't you start us off by telling us why that is?
Draft capital is the only thing that Gabriel has working over Shedeur Sanders. And draft capital is definitely part of our post-draft rookie rankings process. It should be, but it's obviously not the only factor. I mean, there are plenty of examples of us and other rankers having guys who are at the same position, picked by the same team, lower in the draft, but higher in dynasty rankings. I look at our rankings this year. We have Alec Manor ranked ahead of Shamir DK, despite the Titans picking both those wide receivers and picking DK first, because we're relying on our pre-draft evaluation of those guys. And that's what it comes down to for me with Shedeur Sanders over Dillon Gabriel. I think Shedeur Sanders, he wins on tape, and I don't consider myself a tape grinder. Shane is. I know Shane had Shedeur Sanders over Dillon Gabriel pre-draft. That was the case. I didn't see a draft board pre-draft that had Gabriel over Shedeur Sanders. You look at Arif Hassan's consensus big board, which is what I use as, I think the ultimate big board for how these guys stack up talent-wise. Shedeur Sanders was quarterback 2 on that big board at 22nd overall. Dillon Gabriel was quarterback 9 at 168th overall. So not only was Shedeur higher, but it wasn't even close. So I think Shedeur wins on tape. I think Shedeur Sanders wins on production. Even if you just want to look at this past season, which really, should favor Gabriel as a 23-year-old, 6th-year player versus Shedeur Sanders as a 22-year-old, 4th-year college player. Shedeur Sanders last year beat Dillon Gabriel on completion rate, yards per attempt, PFF passing grade, big time throw rate, turnover worthy play rate. Basically any important passing metric you want to look at, Shedeur Sanders was better. Shedeur Sanders even averaged more rushing yards per game than Dillon Gabriel last year, if we want to, flip it more to the fantasy side. More rushing yards per game both last year and career. So again, I get the draft capital. I get the Browns took Dillon Gabriel first, but to me, everything I look at, if these two guys get on the field and are competing with each other, and if it's a fair competition, which maybe it won't be, maybe the Browns coaches just hate Shedeur Sanders and aren't going to give him a fair shake. But to me, if it is a fair competition, I'm going to bet on Shedeur Sanders beating out Dillon Gabriel.
Shane, what about you on Shedeur Sanders versus Dillon Gabriel before I set in?
I think it's a little bit tougher. I'm with Jared in terms of my pure film evaluation. I had Shedeur Sanders ranked as the 38th player in this draft, and so I had him rated as a second-round pick, which I thought was below consensus. I thought was going to be lower than where he went, and then he had that fall. I don't think there's much doubt that Shedeur Sanders on the field is a better quarterback. The problem is when we have a player fall in the draft further than we think. It happens all the time, especially when we're talking fantasy. We think this guy's going to go round 2, he goes round 5 or 6. You have to look at the why. A lot of times maybe we were just higher on a player or higher on the athleticism or higher on the film than that. And I think Shedeur Sanders was a little bit of that. He was never a top 10 pick. He probably wasn't a first round talent to NFL teams on tape, but he probably was more of a second or third round talent. We've heard the stories about the poor interviews and teams putting him on the board to diagram plays, and he couldn't do it, wasn't prepared. And I think the question is, okay, that causes him to, instead of being the Browns' third round pick, instead of Gabriel, be their 5th round pick. How do we weigh that versus taking Gabriel 3rd? And to me, I would still take the shot on the Shedeur Sanders, film on the field, starting quarterback caliber upside, whereas I think Dillon Gabriel probably has maybe like the Gardner Minshew-esque, can start a couple of games, but you always want an upgrade type upside. I think I'd still take the shot on Sanders despite the lower draft capital. And if a lot of those off the field, between the ears things work themselves out, then I think Sanders plays more like a top 100 pick. And I'm going to take that shot on Sanders over Gabriel, but for me, it's close. I mean, having back to back, I would be fine in the superflex league, taking both or taking both late and seeing what works out.
Let me start with the nice part. I totally agree that we should not forget about our priors and that we should not, flip rankings just because of draft order, draft capital. But I also think that we should not ignore what the NFL tells us with how they treat a player and what the drafting team tells us with how it treats players. So there's a lot of layers to this one. I think that's what makes it more interesting than just third round quarterback versus fifth round quarterback for the Browns. So let's start with the priors that have Shedeur Sanders, generally favored here. I mean, both of you guys do mock drafts ahead of the NFL draft, right? Shane, you do a top 100 big board. Do you guys build those paying no attention to what others who do the same thing are building, or do you pay some attention to the market and factor that in a little bit as you go?
I know for me, that consensus big board is a big part of what I lean on. I think guys generally tend to go in that order in the draft.
Yeah, I think you have to put the market in, right? There's people that we trust and believe in and have success and accuracy at this. I think they play a big factor.
So I think that's important because I don't believe that all of the evaluators who had Shedeur Sanders ranked so high just individually watched him and individually ranked him as a top 3 quarterback. There's some anchoring effect to these prospect rankings every year. And I'm not saying it's on purpose, maybe not even realized, but there is some effect to knowing that other people have Shedeur Sanders in this range. And then instead of just building rankings from scratch, you kind of order them how you think. You might look at other people's rankings and be like, I don't like Sanders this much. I think he's behind this quarterback. But you're less likely to go, everybody else has him 2 or 3. I think he's 12th or, whatever. And he still ended up 6th in this draft. So it's not even a huge difference in terms of ordering the quarterbacks. So there's some anchoring effect that I think impacts where that player winds up. And Shedeur Sanders is a different kind of prospect on that front because his prominence has benefited all along from being Deion Sanders' kid. Like, most of us would not have had any idea who the Jackson State quarterback was, 3 and 4 years ago if he wasn't Shedeur Sanders. So that already started him at a higher level of prominence than a similar quarterback who would follow the same path. The NFL does not pass on attractive quarterback prospects because of attitude issues. We saw Ryan Leaf go 2nd overall despite being Ryan Leaf. We had Ryan Mallett in 2011, stands out in my mind at least. Slid to round 3, ostensibly because he had a bad attitude, but still went round 3 because he had a big arm and a couple good years at Arkansas. We watched the Browns famously do their $100,000 study of quarterbacks and then ignore it completely and take Johnny Manziel over Teddy Bridgewater because Johnny Manziel was talented and exciting. This year, we saw Tyler Shuck have a Humpty Dumpty college career where he broke apart, got put back together, had 1 full year of playing quarterback, turns 26 this September, still went with the 8th pick of round 2. We had Mike Green on the edge, not even a quarterback, slide to round 2 because he had sexual assault allegations in high school and college that booted him from Virginia, that the league clearly is concerned about, and yet he still went round 2 because he is a talented player. The league told us by letting Shedeur Sanders slide to round 5 that he's not good enough to be, worth whatever the character risk is. And the character risk seems like, he's got attitude problems. I think, Shane, you're the film guy. You know more than either of us, I think, that quarterback is the most difficult position to actually evaluate on tape. You can, look at all the aspects that you look at for every quarterback, and that's as far as you can go in there. But a lot of it is the mental beyond that and how a guy's going to develop and, all of the things that get talked about and that we can't really measure. So clearly the entire league was like, yeah, I don't see it with this guy altogether. And we'll never know how much of a factor specific interviews were, but the entire league said, no, we don't really like Shedeur Sanders. The Browns then in round 3 took Dillon Gabriel earlier than any of us expected to. So that tells us the Browns very much like Dillon Gabriel. I think the fact that they then came back in, traded picks to move into position to take Shedeur Sanders says they didn't dislike Shedeur Sanders overall. They're like, all right, fine. We definitely don't have quarterback solved. I mean, we can see that by them trading for Kenny Pickett and signing Joe Flacco and then drafting 2 quarterbacks. They're doing it right, collecting all these options and then seeing what happens. But They clearly like Dillon Gabriel better. That's why they took him 2 rounds earlier and then took Shedeur Sanders later. I think, Jared, you're overplaying the stat difference between these guys. Like if we look at last year, sure, Shedeur Sanders had the better stat season, but Dillon Gabriel, if you look at their entire runs, like if we look at 6 years for Dillon Gabriel versus Shedeur Sanders 2 years at the FBS level, Gabriel was at least even and ahead in a few spots in all of the passing rate measurements. He was ahead in rushing yards per game. And I know that Shedeur Sanders gets dinged a lot for the sacks on that front, but that's part of what teams don't like about him is he runs into sacks all the time and had issues with how he played quarterback. Shane mentioned that in his dynasty value write-up as well. So we've got a guy who has been at least as good a passer overall. We've got a guy who was a more productive runner statistically in college, had 0.5 rushing touchdowns per game versus Shedeur Sanders going for 0.3 across his Colorado time. To me, if we had Sanders like one spot behind Gabriel, I don't think we'd be having this discussion, but we have Sanders at 37 in our default superflex PPR rookie rankings and Gabriel at 43. To me, it's messed up logic.
Well, listen, let's not lose the forest for the trees here. We're talking about a guy who I think I'm the high man on Sanders, and I view him as like a late 3rd round pick in super flex rookie drafts. Any quarterback with any chance of seeing the field in the NFL is, I think, worth that type of investment in super flex drafts. I won't be aggressively targeting Shedeur Sanders in these super flex rookie drafts, but I will pretty comfortably take him over Dillon Gabriel because I just think he's the better prospect.
And I'll say to the attitude point, I don't think all attitude issues are built the same. Johnny Manziel and Ryan Leaf had agents. I think that was a big part of helping them get to where they are. Shedeur Sanders didn't have an agent to say, hey, here's what you need to know when you go into this interview with the Giants. Like I think there is a lot of rawness in terms of the process for him that he wasn't prepared for. And will that necessarily mean he's not prepared to play NFL football? That remains to be seen. So I do think, hey, if he had an agent, I don't think he would have been a 5th round pick. I mean, maybe he's on par with Dillon Gabriel. Maybe that's a tough decision for the Browns in 3rd. I don't know. But I think that played a really big factor in his fall.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, and we'll never know to what degree, but to me, the league doesn't pass on a guy until round 5 if it's just worried about him being raw heading into interviews. So I guess we'll see. I think the fact that the Browns did eventually move up for him says that they liked Sanders, but they liked Gabriel better. I agree that it's ultimately not all that effectual distinction between these two players, but I think it's going to be worth keeping in mind for other guys in other situations going forward. If you think I'm wrong, let me know in the YouTube comments. If you think Jared and Shane are wrong, still let me know so that I can print out those comments and fold them into paper planes and just throw them at them while we're working on other stuff. And make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you know before new shows drop. We got a rookie mock draft coming up next, and summer's fast approaching. So even if you don't play Dynasty, we're going to be getting further into non-Dynasty formats very soon. Let's see exactly where both of those quarterbacks sit in your format, along with all the other rookie quarterbacks and rookies across positions on draftsharks.com. Because if you're getting set for a Dynasty rookie draft right now, we want to be your unfair advantage.